NCAA eventually became a joke, but there is a new enforcement arm in college football. So the question, obviously on everybody's mind, is will it actually work? Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports had an interesting article about this. College football is finally going to crack down on NIL violations, on, we guess, tampering, and on revenue sharing abuse. But, of course, nobody knows if it's actually going to work. There are coaches like LSU's Brian Kelly that think so. He said this is not a slap on the wrist. That's what he told Yahoo Sports. But with fines and transfer restrictions and legal battles looming, there are some coaches that are skeptical about this. So what we're going to get is a new era of enforcement and I guess real punishments, which is something we haven't seen in quite some time. There is a power conference-led enforcement group that is separate from the NCAA, and they are set to police revenue-sharing violations. So this is all to do with the House settlement that is coming out, where the schools will be paying their student-athletes. Some of these penalties include massive financial fines. Schools exceeding the cap, which right now I believe is set at $20.5 million, they could owe 3 to 5 times the overage. So if you exceed the cap at 20.5 by $1 million, you could get fined up to $5 million. You could get revenue-sharing pool reductions, right? Schools could lose part of next year's athlete payments. You could have transfer limits. Teams caught breaking rules could be restricted in how many transfers they sign. That's kind of odd, but if all of these schools agree to it, then that is something that is going to be coming down. Brian Kelly said there will be real enforcement. He said penalties will be quick and swift. Very interesting. I like the words that he's using, because if there are actual rules, I think that's probably better for the sport. Deloitte, I believe is the name, they are going to take over the NIL deal approvals. And this is basically a new clearinghouse that's going to evaluate all NIL deals that are worth $600 or more. If a deal is flagged as inflated, the athlete must revise the amount to match Deloitte's fair market value. So an example of this, you got a $100,000 deal that's deemed to be worth only $50,000, it must be renegotiated. If a deal is rejected twice, it moves to arbitration, and it says that athletes can still play until arbitration is resolved, which should be expected in about 45 days. This one's going to be hard to go with unless you get some kind of congressional oversight, unless there is some kind of rule that protects the NCAA or just college sports in general. How do you put a cap on fair market value, right? Because it would depend on, a Nebraska football player's deal in Nebraska might be worth more than an Eastern Michigan's player in Ypsilanti, right? So what exactly is, how do you tell what that's worth? And you can compare across the board and see exactly who's the most popular and da-da-da-da-da. And if it's based on social media followers and stuff like that, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous to me. But either way, the big thing about this is the coaches are finally getting the structure that they wanted. Brian Kelly said that we've been living in a world with no rules. We're now going to get what we asked for. I think that's good. I do think that's good. The biggest violations that are being targeted, exceeding that revenue sharing cap, $20.5 million annually per school, tampering with players that are still under contract at other schools, and using boosters to sidestep those revenue caps, right? So the NIL deals can't be crazy. You can't be giving somebody $1 million on the side from what you would normally get. Alabama's coach, Kalen DeBoer, did talk about how the $20.5 million, the revenue sharing, would even the playing field again for Alabama. Alabama has lost 100-something transfers over the past 3 or 4 years. I mean, they have lost the average of a full recruiting class 2.5 times over the past 4 years. It is insane, based on net, right? Because they did bring in some transfers, but they have not brought in nearly the amount that would circumvent losing as many as they did. So this is going to be very interesting. So as I mentioned with this, if there are more rules, there's probably going to be more lawsuits, right? Legal challenges are going to show up. Mississippi State President Mark Keenum, my apologies, Mark Emmert, he said even with the new settlement, we're still going to be peppered with challenges and lawsuits. I think everybody knows what's coming, right? The potential legal issues do include Title IX lawsuits because 90% of the revenue sharing is expected to go to football and men's basketball. There are challenges that should be expected over fair market NIL evaluations, as I just talked about. Antitrust lawsuit arguing. The antitrust lawsuits are probably going to argue revenue sharing caps are illegal, right? Fair market value is what somebody is willing to pay you. So how do you do that? How do you get away with that? College leaders are still lobbying Congress to get legal protections, but so far, there's nothing. There is something coming up this month, I believe later this week, and we'll see exactly how that goes. I don't think they're actually going to vote on anything, but we could get the wheels turning, right? The ball could get rolling, whatever other cliche phrase you want to put in there. We'll toss it in. Will it work? Or do we think maybe this is just chaos, right? Because who knows? The enforcement does sound good on paper. But schools have fought restrictions before. The NCAA lost control of NIL enforcement. Is the new system going to hold up? Right? If the lawsuits pile up, the whole thing could collapse before it ever even takes effect. Final thoughts on this. Coaches are finally getting some kind of structure, which is what they wanted. But can the enforcement arm survive legal attacks? I don't know if that's the case. So you guys tell me, let me know what you think. I'm very curious about this. I like the idea of rules. I don't know, based on the lawsuits that have come out in the past 5 years or so, I don't know if what they are trying to implement will actually be considered legal in a court of law. That's the problem with this. So you guys jump in the comments. You tell me what you think about this. Thanks for listening to Winning Cures Everything. Make sure and follow me on Twitter @GaryWCE. If you want to toss in a question, you can email me Gary@winningcureseverything.com. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.